Welcome to another Tuesdays with Tim. This week's a special presentation about Verdi, and this has been prepared by Wayne Oratory Society member and board member Jeffrey Berwin. And Verdi has been a topic that we have shared together over the years, especially in light of the 2017 project at the National Cathedral, and it's culminated with the presentation that you're going to see tonight. And so it's an honor to invite someone in whose life's work is storytelling, and to actually hear him talk about his own encounters of Verdi, as well as giving us history and background about Verdi himself. So sit back and enjoy this evening.
I was basically raised by my grandparents, Rose and Nat, who were always Nanny and Granddad to me. I called them that even far into my childhood. I lived with Nanny and Granddad for the first 4 years of my life, and even when I was sent back to live with my emotionally troubled mother, they always remained my real parents. Their home around the corner was the refuge I'd go to when things were tough. And you might well imagine that this was not a one-way street. I was the apple of their eyes, the son they always wanted, and we had a wonderful relationship. To me, Nanny represented laughter, which lightened life, and she loved theater, friendship, family, and her go-to dessert, warm chocolate pudding poured over angel food cake. Granddad, a businessman, was also drawn to the arts and the artists who made that art. He developed close friendships with painters and sculptors, most notably with the Dean of American Craftsmen, Wharton Esherick, whose home and studio is now the Wharton Esherick Museum in Paoli. I like to think I carry forth that legacy by serving on the board of the museum, and I also continue Nanny and Granddad's passion for great music by singing with and serving on the board of the Wayne Oratorio Society. They both loved opera and made a wise choice when it came to instill this in me. For many years, they had season tickets to the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, and when I turned 13, they took me to my first opera. And even though that first opera was a seemingly endless production of Götterdämmerung by Wagner, it was still love at first sight and sound. I remember sitting in that vast, glorious auditorium, gazing up at the gold-leafed ceilings, the rows on rows of red velvet chairs, the Met's signature starburst crystal chandeliers floating over it all. This was a matinee, and precisely at 2 p.m., I was startled to see the many chandeliers begin to rise toward the ceiling as they simultaneously dimmed. Wow, I was hooked, and the music hadn't even started yet. I went to George Washington University, majoring in art history, knowing I'd eventually run the family retail stores. One summer, I went with Nanny to the Mann Music Center to my first hearing, maybe my first confrontation, with the Verdi Requiem. As the Philadelphia Orchestra exploded into the Dies Irae, I sat bolt upright in my seat, leaned forward, enrapt and astonished. What are these sounds? What is this overwhelmingly emotional thing going on here? This was one of the most exciting and also frightening pieces of music I'd ever heard, and as I listened entranced to the rest of the Requiem, I knew that I had somehow met a force of nature on a primal level. What was Verdi saying? And why was I so shaken by it? Who is this guy? And what's with this music? It seemed to be more than music. It was an unleashing of something, somehow, and it was calling to me. Since that experience in my late teens, I've spent the last 40-plus years walking side by side with Verdi's music, really in relationship with it, turning to it often. It speaks to me on a deep emotional level. His operas are not the operas of a Wagner dealing with gods and myths. Rather, his works are really about what it means to be fully human, to experience life in all its drama, turmoil, desires, tragedies, and triumphs. Eventually, I started reading about Verdi the man, and have discovered that he had quite a dramatic life himself. I mean, how do you separate a person and their art anyway? I don't think you can. I've concluded that if you had to find one word to summarize the essence of Verdi's work, it could be the word liberation. Liberation, freedom, breaking free. But liberation from what? And as I encounter and re-encounter again and again the Requiem as well as his operas, why, when I hear certain arias or passages, do I feel such a fundamental welling up of emotion? Why does Verdi make me weep? Not out of sorrow, but out of something more than that. Perhaps a mix of solace, passion, yearning. Libera me, free me. Here's a clip of the legendary Leontine Price with the orchestra of La Scala Milan. Libera me, Domine, de morte eterna, in die illa tremenda. Deliver me, O Lord, from everlasting death on that dreadful day. So, over the years, as I continued to listen and digest Verdi's compositions, I also read more about his life. He was born on October 10th, 1813, and died on January 27th, 1901, old and full of years, as the final verse in the book of Job says. And in those 87 years, Verdi lived a life unique in so many ways. He was born in an age when there was no unified country of Italy. The land was broken up into separate kingdoms and principalities up until it unified in 1861. Before this, it was mostly controlled under the French Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There was a political revolutionary movement called the Risorgimento, which sought to overthrow this tyranny and unify the Italian peninsula for the first time since the fall of the Roman Empire hundreds of years before. This was the context within which the young Verdi grew up in the north in the Duchy of Parma. But let's avoid a history lesson or a biography here. Let's skip ahead to what may have been the most formative time of his life. Verdi has moved to Milan with his young wife, Margherita, and their 2 infant children. He has recently launched his first opera to moderate success, just enough for Verdi to receive a commission to compose a second opera, this one a comedy called Un giorno di regno, King for a Day. Then, your worst nightmare strikes. In 1840, Margherita dies not long after the deaths of both of their children. Verdi is suddenly bereft of his family, those he loves most. And in addition to this personal grief, he witnesses his second opera hissed off the stage, achieving only 1 performance. Game over. I mean, how would you have handled this? Verdi, at 27, has experienced compound traumas in just a few years, which naturally led him into a depression personally and professionally. His life had come to a full stop. He is eventually coaxed to compose again, reluctantly, and this time with the opera Nabucco. He achieves overnight success and quickly becomes an international figure at the age of 28. Listen to this famous choral piece from Nabucco, which to this day is considered to be all but the Italian national anthem. The Italians of the time recognized the highly charged political message underlying the famous Hebrew chorus, Va pensiero, slaves under the yoke of tyranny, yearning for liberation. Verdi went on to compose 26 operas, many of them masterpieces: Rigoletto, La Traviata, Il Trovatore, Aida, and others. Time and again, the themes of defiance inhabit the stories, the characters, and of course, the music itself. There is a muscular vitality, a vibrancy, a pulsing life in Verdi's music, not to mention an endless feast of melody. Verdi was a man of his time, the land, the people, a savvy businessman, and especially a man of the theater. He understood drama and had his hand in all aspects of his productions: the music, stage direction, casting, sets, costumes, and so forth. He regularly challenged the censors, also opera singers accustomed to having things done their way. Conventional, narrow thinking was anathema to him. His evolution as an artist was one of constant reinvention, staying in the trenches, working his art, incrementally refining each opera every time. His name and his music became synonymous with the Risorgimento, and when Italy unified, he was elected one of its first senators. When the Viceroy of Egypt wanted to mark the opening of the Suez Canal, he commissioned Verdi, who composed Aida, arguably the grand opera of all opera. The Tsar of Russia commissioned an opera with La Forza del Destino being the result. Even Verdi's name was an acronym for liberation. VERDI was code for Vittorio Emanuele Re d'Italia, Victor Emmanuel, King of Italy. And Viva Verdi was graffitied on walls throughout the land. The idea of freedom from oppression and Verdi the composer were indelibly linked in the hearts of his countrymen. He loved Shakespeare. 3 of his operas are based on the works of the bard. Outwardly, an introverted, prickly, tough guy, he was fearless, unconventional, yet generous in quiet ways, especially to his people, his paisan. He was financially very successful and bought many, many acres of land, which he farmed for decades. You can visit Via Verdi in St. Agata to this day. He built and funded an old age home for poverty-stricken musicians called Casa di Riposa. It is still there in Milan, thriving to this day, and he and his wife are buried there in a magnificent crypt. A few years ago, I made pilgrimage there to see what Verdi called his greatest production. He built Casa di Riposa when he was 83. It was so moving for me to stand in that space, gazing down at where Verdi was buried next to his wife. He loved the land and found solace and contentment leaving the world behind him to be close to the good earth. He was a major international public figure and intensely private. He hated authority and censorship. He would not sacrifice his ideas, principles, or art to please people or society. He distrusted the priesthood and organized religion, yet I detect a deep spirituality pervading his work. I believe his ultimate defiance is tied to aging and to death itself. I wonder if his Requiem, composed in his early 60s, and so full of passion and rage and a pleading for mercy, if this is his response to losing everything when he was a younger man. When I was younger, I shepherded my grandparents into their old age. They remained vital right into their 80s, and then, slowly, I saw each start to fade, particularly Granddad. His final years, I realized that he had become a shadow of himself, and this hurt me. His vitality was just not there anymore, and his creative force and interest in life was diminished. On the other hand, Nanny remained vibrant right through her early 90s, even making a new best friend who was around 100 at the time. Looking back, I see that I was deeply affected to see them slowly fade from their own vitality. I don't want that for myself. And now, in my mid-60s, as I slowly become my grandparents, I think about this a lot. I begin to ask myself, are my best days behind me? Do I still have more to give? To create? Do I still have a voice? Do I matter? So I look to how my Verdi ended his days. Yes, I think of him as my Verdi, as a kind of mentor. He lived a triumphant, successful life by every measure. He was like the musical George Washington of his country. He reinvented his art and himself over and over and over again. And so as he reaches his 70s, he has every reason to simply enjoy his life, cultivate his land, pull back, because he has nothing left to prove. Let the younger composers like Mascagni or Puccini take over the musical crown of Italy. They are nipping at his heels anyway, certain that the old man is old hat. They are the new kids on the block. But true creative force cannot be ignored indefinitely. His beloved second wife, Giuseppina Strepponi, who had for decades been a devoted, loving, quiet driving force, did much to keep Verdi engaged with life. She, along with some close friends, waged a delicately insistent campaign to get him to compose again. So, to the outside world, Verdi is in retirement. Secretly, however, he is working on Otello, which premieres as an international event in 1887. Verdi is 74, and yet again is celebrated throughout the world with the advent of this masterpiece. "We are back," he wrote. Yet, after the opening, he soon sinks into a depression. "Tutto è finito," he says. All is finished. And yet he has something left to say to those of his time, to those of us in our time. For inspiration, he turns again, one more time, to his beloved Shakespeare and eventually consummates his career with Falstaff. Premiered in 1893, Verdi is now 80. He has reinvented himself again. This time, the music itself is different, unpredictable. Like quicksilver, it dances, rushes, and bubbles like a laughing brook. It's so full of vitality that Verdi barely finishes one musical idea before going on to the next. Notably, more than ever, the music is subservient to the story, to the people in the story. His music is in support of the human drama. So with Falstaff, perhaps we come full circle. So let's take one final look at the younger Verdi at age 27. His second opera lasted one night, a complete fiasco. It was his only comedy until now. With Falstaff, Verdi smiles, laughs, and loves, and perhaps says to us that aging and even death itself does not have to be the final word. Falstaff ends with a fugue where all voices which during the opera were in conflict at last come together in complex harmony which celebrates the feast which is life itself. The final lyrics, "He who laughs last laughs best." So I am trusting that I can look to Verdi and perhaps live what I call the Verdi life. I don't need to fade as I age. I can create and reinvent, and my greatest works can still be before me. So, how about you? Maybe life is a song, and you could sing it until the end of your days. So here's a final clip, the finale of Falstaff. And by the way, I got to see this very production at the Metropolitan Opera just about a year ago. Enjoy.
Facciamo il parentato e che il ciel vi dia gioia. Una cosa terminiam la scena e con se ne Falstaff tutti andiamo a cena. Tutto nel mondo è burla l'uomo. È nato burlone, burlone, burlone. Tutto nel mondo è burla l'uomo. È nato burlone. È nato burlone, burlone, burlone. Tutto nel mondo è burla l'uomo. È nato burlone, burlone. Tutti cappati!
Not bad for an 80-year-old. Viva Verdi! Now, go and be free. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this presentation with us. For me, it was fascinating to watch the parallels of your own individual life story paralleled with Verdi's life story, and hearing that juxtaposition of connection, and what that has meant to you in terms of how you both live your life as well as how you experience music. So how did this project come to be?
Well, when I was 2 years now, I've been thinking about something like this for years, and I've done 40 years of community theater, and I've produced and directed and acted and sung for years, and as you already heard, loved Verdi for most of my life. And over the last 3 or 4 years, I've had this creative urge to be like, there's an aspect of Verdi that I'm really relating to on a new level, and I don't know what to do with it. And one of the things I've learned about creating art is you've got to just deal with the gray areas, the periods of uncertainty, and not fret about it. I'm a type A, get it done, set the goal. So I've been thinking about this for a number of years, and the threads started pulling together as I started getting a little older. And I'm like, there's something out there now called ageism, which is, and I'm like, well, I don't want that. And I've started really touching base with my own passion for a lot of stuff. Like, don't categorize me. And don't tell me my best days may be behind me, even if I'm the one saying it. And that started threading it together. And interestingly, it's during COVID where we've started doing Zoom, and you're doing Tuesdays with Tim, and you created the space and encouraged me to, why not put something on film here? And I had a real joy doing it.
And I think that's part of the challenge, as we're all in this COVID time, forced monastic life essentially, is our routine's been disrupted. The things that give us joy, the things that give us peace, the things that help us feel significance and being part of community, all those things have really been stripped away for a minute. So I know for myself as an artist, it was how do I keep creating myself when I can't be with my choirs, or when I can't be in person with these groups? And so I find it interesting that this kind of forced monastic period helped provide the space, for this, revelation, maybe we'll say, as these threads come together. So I guess the question is, has the process culminated for you?
Quite the opposite. I've already asking myself, okay, now what? Interestingly, I just got a Google alert that via Verdi, when you saw the picture of his house in St. Agata in Italy, because of COVID, they need a lot of money to deal with repairs because they're not getting the admissions income. And they're doing it in crowdfunding right now. And I went, aha. So sometimes, God or people will bring you the next thing if you just stay open. And for me, this is simply, it's both a milestone because I've been thinking about this message for a while, and I believe it's an ignition. And I'm hoping it's an ignition for people watching this.
Yeah, and I think that's a good word, as we've talked about human condition and the longing that we all have to feel that we're living lives of significance, that we're contributing, that we have more to contribute, to especially delve into this person's life and, to see, at 27, both in life and in profession, to just have hit the worst of times. And, as we both know, we all experience hard times. And yet the power is the resiliency, as well as the community that, continued to press Verdi forward and encouraged and supported to say, keep, doing what you're called to do as a composer. Keep creating art. Keep giving, to the world that wants to hear from you. And I find that to be a really compelling message, and one that, we all need to hear, where regardless of what we individually do, there are ways in which we can give back, create, and continue to pour good energy into the world, even in some of the worst of times. So for you, let's speak on one of the last points in there. What does it look like to you to live a life of significance?
To live the Verdi life. To not listen to the voices of society that may tell you something, because labeling is what we humans love to do. Verdi didn't. I think I will continue to look to my friends and to my mentors, whether living or dead in this case, with Verdi, to be role models for me. Is how can I, continue in my 60s and then in my 70s and 80s and God willing beyond, how can I live as vibrantly as I can and not do the natural, let's slowly shut it down. And, COVID is in a weird way an invitation to look straight in the eye the limitations we have anyway, day by day. So what I intend to do with this is keep exploring. Mm-hmm. This guy lived, you have a huge book, this Verdi book, there's books on just this one composer. Mm-hmm. What if I just keep revisiting and think about the different threads and start, just keep the, creativity is exploration. Mm-hmm. And it also, frankly, makes you very happy. It's great. When we're making music, when we're creating something, let it be messy. It can be messy and you're creating, and it's terrific. It's a kind of medicine. Mm-hmm. It's an artistic vaccine.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the rehearsal process is, lots of things happen, lots of things need to be fixed, but in amidst that, we're already beginning to gather a sense of ethos, a sense of spirit of the composer, and the more that we learn of them and their own life story, the more I think we can see the relevance to even us today, decades, centuries later, depending on the composer. And in the end, we're unpacking their humanness, and we're connecting, as human spirits, both in the art of what we're doing, of creating music, but also in the art of understanding one another and trying to actually say, who are we as people, and what are we doing with the time that we have, here on Earth. So, thank you for sharing this project with us. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you've enjoyed the other Tuesdays with Tim that have been produced so far. Those are out on YouTube if you want to go back and either see them for the first time or revisit them. Next week we'll be featuring the choral scholars, who will be coming in to provide a program of anthems for us to either listen to or to sing along with. And then the following week we will be moving to another virtual voice lesson. So I hope you're well. I hope you're staying safe. God bless you, and take care.